I'm Regis Tremblay. In September of 2012, I went to Jeju Island in South Korea. I knew that people there were protesting the construction of a large naval base in a tiny seaside village in order to accommodate Obama's pivot to Asia. I was inspired by their struggle to make this film. What I discovered made me cry. I felt angry and ashamed at what my country had done on Jeju and in Korea during that forgotten war. I am presenting this story as it has never been told before. I hope you will be inspired by the indomitable spirit and energy of the people of Gangjeong, who are on the front lines of the global struggle against militarism, war, the destruction of the environment, and the abuse of human rights. America has made many serious mistakes throughout her history, and it is my hope that if Americans can accept the truth of our past, and that America is no more exceptional than any other nation, village, or tribe, we might return to the greatness and beliefs upon which this nation was founded. For it is written in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jeju Island is a special autonomous, self-governing province of Korea, lying about 60 miles from the southern tip of the mainland. Jeju is a volcanic island about 45 miles east to west and 25 miles north to south. Gangjeong Village is located on the southern edge of the island, where the main industries are farming and fishing. Urumbi is the name given to a huge basalt rock formation on the coast in Gangjeong Village, which the villagers believe is alive, and where for centuries they have prayed, recreated, and held special ceremonies and events.
It's an island in the East China Sea.
Located strategically in the East China Sea, the island's potential to find itself once again in the crosshairs of war increases exponentially with the construction of a naval base to accommodate 20 warships, including Aegis destroyers equipped with anti-ballistic missiles, aircraft carriers, and nuclear submarines. The East China Sea is China's primary trade route, and Jeju is only 304 miles from Shanghai, 1,056 miles from Hong Kong, and 584 miles from Beijing.
It's Jeju Island. There are crabs and frogs and dolphins and fish and coral and volcanic rock and a beautiful place I've never been. In an island in the East China Sea.
Gangjeong Village is only 1 mile from Tiger Island, a UNESCO-designated biosphere preserve and World Heritage Site.
It's Jeju Island. They want to put nuclear missiles and submarines and aircraft carriers in this beautiful place I've never been.
It is completely illogical to construct a base in this place because Gangjeong is not a deep harbor port, but entirely exposed to the sea and the typhoons that regularly batter this coast. In the summer of 2012, Typhoon Bolaven destroyed 2 of the massive caissons, each costing millions of dollars in proving that the design of this base is fundamentally flawed.
Force against China, a beautiful place I've never been. From an island in the East China Sea. From Jeju Island. From Jeju Island. Now I'm crying for a beautiful place I've never been. It's an island in the East China Sea. It's Jeju Island. Island of peace. It's Jeju Island.
Well, I've been very aware of the protests of this base and have signed petitions against it and all of that, but I've had trouble understanding the logic for it. Okinawa is within very close shooting range of most targets that we might have in Northeast Asia. I mean, we were flying B-52s to Vietnam to bomb Vietnam from Okinawa. We certainly can hit most of the Chinese mainland. Our Navy has bases all over the Pacific. Furthermore, we don't really need a base. Bases different than those we have in Japan. I mean, Yokosuka near Tokyo is the base of the Pacific Fleet. It was the base of the Japanese Navy during and before World War II. It's a huge installation. We have Sasebo. We have 2 or 3 other naval bases in Japan. Why do we need a naval base on Jeju Island? And why does the Korean Navy need a base there? Chinhae is its biggest naval base near Busan. It's a stone's throw from Jeju Island. So I've never quite understood the rationale for this base.
This is the exterior of a museum commemorating April 3rd, the beginning of the massacre of as many as 60,000 men, women, and children on Jeju Island in 1948. The scorched earth operation continued into the Korean War, when an estimated 200,000 civilians fleeing the war were killed, many ordered shot dead by American forces.
그래가지고 우리 아버지를 이제 제일 먼저 총으로 쏘았다. 눈앞에서 우리 아프다. 이제 총으로 쏘니까 우리 할아버지가 뭐였고 그러니까 우리 아들 죽였는지 나도 죽여달라고. 아들 없는데 난 사람 뭐냐. 그러니까 이제 또 우리 할아버지도 지금 총으로 쏴버리고 또 이제 우리 할머니가 있다가 이제 요새 난 나가면 할머니인데 나도 아들도 없고 할아버지도 죽어버리는데 난 사람 뭐냐. 그러니까 우리 할머니까지 이제 총으로 쏴버려가지고 그냥 이제 감리적으로 있습니다. 젊은이 할아버지 아버지를
비가 내리면 어디가 하늘이고 어디가
그때도 명령을 이거든 게 아니도 예 큰일이거든. 그러니까 거기서 또 쳐야 되니까 또 다시 나버리지만 거기에다 그냥 한 7, 80명 그냥 맞다 쏘아 그냥 지름비 하나 불붙여놓으니까 이거 거북이거든. 야 이게 사람이 이런 놈들이 어디냐 이 죽일 놈들 나 이거 죽여도 고개라 죽이지 이거 그냥 기르면 다 하이가 있거든. 저만이라 이 물속에 이제 들어가가지고 그냥 가마귀는 각각 해가니까 어제 기왕 죽어도 해가 내가 마땅히 수학 저기 얼굴이 아프다 그러면 이라도 못 박아야겠네 해가지고.
그 총살의 현장에서 기적적으로 살아남은 김태준 할아버지. 당시 23살이었던 청년 김태준은 등과 어깨 쪽지 그리고 팔에 3발의 총을 맞고도 다행히 목숨을 건졌다.
이 뒤에서 밤을 끊으실걸? 아니 그러니까
그는 그날의 상황을 결코 잊을 수가 없다.
내과에서 죽였거든. 이 사람들이 그 뒤에서 조종을 하지만 이건 한 자리에서 100명을 이제 총괄 시켰으니까 총괄 시키고 그 사람들이 전부 이제 불붙여버리고 그렇게 된 거죠.
어느 하나가 홀로 일어나 아니라고 말할 사람
지금 그저 한 3만 명은 넘을 거예요. 사슴부터인데 그 부대가 그 다음에 지가 간다면은 완전히 남아있는 잔디가 좋다는 거니까 그거는 그렇게 숫자로 적죠. 다만 눈치지 않을 너무 많았어요. 그저 모르구나 하면은 무조건 갖다 주는 거예요. 말로 그래서 별명이 있어요. 모르구나. 근데 모른다고 하면 모르구나 모르면 즐거운 아주 순박하니까 저처럼 나쁜 그런데 모르구나는 그냥 턱대로 청산하고 심지어는 죽여가지고 먹이잖아 축제에다 꽂아놓고 살벌 싸겠다고요 전범이. 그거는 우리가 개불 대신에 너무 잘못한 거예요. 너무 나갔어요. 남이 적지를 정리해가지고 그렇게 못하는데 동족을 그렇게 했다는 거.
In order to understand why the people of Jeju are against the Navy base, it is important to go back at least as far as 1945, when Korea was liberated from 35 years of Japanese occupation. More than 1 million Koreans were forced to work in factories in Japan, and thousands of Korean women and girls became sex slaves of the Japanese military. After the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan formally surrendered to General Douglas MacArthur in 1945. With the lowering of the Japanese flag and the raising of the Stars and Stripes, Korea went from one occupation to another when the U.S. military under General MacArthur took control of the country and the military. When the U.S. military command abandoned its promise to hold elections on the entire Korean peninsula and instead attempted to force an election on the South Korean people, effectively dividing the North from the South, the fiercely independent people of Jeju resisted and rose up against the American military government of Korea. March 1st, 1947, was the turning point in the modern history of Jeju when police, under the control of the United States military government, opened fire on a crowd and killed 6 protesters. 35 people were rounded up and packed like sardines in a 36-square-foot cell. This tragic event triggered the April 3rd uprising. Continued in March of 1948 when 3 young men were tortured to death by police. In another incident, a middle school student was hung upside down and clubbed to death by police who said the student died of a chronic disease. On May 5th, 1948, General William F. Dean, the U.S. Army military governor in Korea, visited Jeju and presided over a closed-door meeting, including the leadership of the Army and police and the civil administration of the police department. The following day, the U.S. military government in Korea then dismissed Regiment Commander Kim Ik-yul for wanting to use diplomacy to end the uprising. Amid election-related clashes nationwide, the uprising on Jeju put the U.S. military government in Korea on the highest order. operations on Jeju were declared null and void. The U.S. military government in Korea dispatched Colonel Rothwell H. Brown, commander of the 20th Regiment, to Jeju and instructed him to command crackdown operations on the uprising. On May 22, 1948, Colonel Brown developed a plan to suppress the rebellion. He ordered the Korean constabulary and police to force the villages out of the mountains and to the coast, and to secure all areas from the coast to 2.5 miles inland. Brown then ordered the Korean constabulary to stage a crackdown operation on the insurgents, sweeping from the west to the east, and ordered the Coast Guard to block the coast so supplies could not reach the people. Colonel Brown also instituted a propaganda program to prove that the rebellious people were communists. Following an order from Colonel Brown, the new regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Park Chin-kyung, arrested 4,000 civilians in 6 weeks, and the U.S. military government congratulated Park on a successful operation and promoted him to colonel.
Rothwell Brown had a Colonel Park that he liked very much because Mr. Park had rounded up people that he called rebels, several thousand of them, put them in a camp, and he got commended and promoted for this. It's a very good example of American involvement in the counterinsurgency campaign, which consisted mainly of burning villages up in the hills and concentrating thousands of civilians in the perimeter of the island. And peasants lived on the side of the mountain, going up into the highland. And by the time the suppression campaign was over, something like 60% of all villages on the island had been destroyed. Hundreds of thousands were homeless, and they had been driven essentially into concentration camps and pushed around to the edges of the island where they could be controlled. And then you had just a free fire zone on the interior of the island. Anybody still there was assumed to be either a guerrilla or supporting a guerrilla. And that is really how you account for the extraordinary toll that this rebellion took.
Later, in a letter to the U.S. installed President of Korea, Syngman Rhee, General William L. Roberts praised the 9th Regiment Commander Song Yu-chan for spearheading the Scorched Earth operation. This genocide and cleansing campaign was conducted by the South Korean security forces under United States military government orders. The American policy was to quickly clean out the guerrillas with overwhelming force to show Washington how Korea was handling the communist threat. The Americans were quick to praise Syngman Rhee's campaign to wipe out the guerrillas, in spite of internal documents that detailed horrible atrocities. What happened on Jeju under the American occupation was nothing more than a peasant rebellion. The insurrection on Jeju and in the southwestern part of Korea was the result of a brutal Japanese occupation, the great disparity of wealth, the formal separation of North and South, and the corruption and brutality of the Rhee dictatorship. Evidence shows that the Soviets had no involvement with the Southern rebels, and the North Koreans were not involved. In fact, previously classified secret documents prove that the Americans organized and equipped the counterinsurgency forces, trained them, provided them with intelligence, planned their actions, and commanded them directly. As Bruce Cummings wrote in his book, The Korean War,
it was on this hauntingly beautiful island that the post-war world first witnessed American culpability for unrestrained violence against indigenous peoples fighting for self-determination and social justice. And I still feel strongly that fighting for social justice, for dignity, for self-determination is at the core of our problems with Korea going back to 1945.
And the world would witness more of this unrestrained U.S.-inflicted violence with the carpet bombing and napalming of North Korea for 3 years until there were no more targets left. Pilots were ordered to gun down everything that moved in the north, even peasants working in the fields. Charles Hanley, in the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Bridge at No Gun Ri, presents the ugly facts about the massacre of as many as 400 refugees at the hands of the U.S. 7th Cavalry and the United States Air Force.
These people who were trapped under the bridge for 3 days and being shot and killed, that they were from early on screaming and hollering for water. And the soldiers described these stacks of bodies being piled up in the mouth of the tunnels under the bridge as these desperate people were trying to protect themselves, survivors, against further gunfire. Joe Jackman, who was a rifleman in G Company of 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, Joe Jackman told the BBC when they interviewed him that the word that came down was kill them all. He said 8 to 80, blind, crippled, or crazy. Kill them all was the word that came down, he said. And I shot, he said. I shot too. In the 25th Infantry Division, the commanding general of the division told the troops to treat civilians in the war zone as enemy. And his colonels relayed that as to shoot civilians. Treat them as enemy and shoot them. No refugees to cross the line. Fire everyone trying to cross the line. Use discretion in the case of women and children. In other words, if you choose to, you can. These were very damning documents. These are essentially unheard of in modern U.S. military history. Most of these men were deeply disturbed by what happened. And in the years since, they've all been haunted by what they did and what they saw at Nogan Ri. And so many of them had stories about the ghosts that they saw constantly. One fellow in Florida, Buddy Wenzel, and he has since passed away, but he would see this little girl. He knows he killed a little girl at Nogan Ri, and she would appear, he'd be sitting in his backyard in Florida, and suddenly she'd appear there in the backyard, and she would always try talking to him. She's trying to tell him something, and he can't understand. These ghosts were in the minds of so many men. Art Hunter, living alone up on a hill in Virginia, almost every night he would be awakened in the middle of the night by these two elderly Koreans standing at the foot of his bed, and he had killed them, and he deliberately killed this old man and old woman, machine gun them. Art was a machine gunner, and then they haunted him for the rest of his life. But other men too told us that they feel ghosts around them all the time because of Nogan Ri.
General Curtis LeMay, who commanded the firebombing of Germany and the firebombing and atomic bombing of Japan, articulated the American policy this way.
If you kill enough of them, they stop fighting.
During the Vietnam War, he said,
We should bomb Vietnam back into the Stone Age.
LeMay's advice to those American GIs who killed women and children creates serious cognitive dissonance in the minds of everyone sent to war.
Every soldier thinks something of the moral aspects of what he's doing. But all war is immoral, and if you let that bother you, you're not a good soldier.
It is tragically ironic that all of these civilians were killed by or under the command of Americans who were sent to protect them from the North Korean communists. In the end, the U.S. dropped 698,000 tons of bombs and napalm on Korea destroying all of North Korea's major cities. It is estimated that 3 to 4 million people died during the Korean War. 1 million were civilians. Only in this context can one begin to understand the resistance of the people of Gangjang Village and Jeju Island to the construction of one of the planet's largest naval bases in the East China Sea. Just as the people of Jeju rose up in 1948, the residents of Jeju and Gangjang are again fighting for self-determination, a free and transparent democratic process, and the right to live peacefully as they have for hundreds of years. They are fighting for their land, which has been taken over by the government. They are fighting for their livelihood as farmers and fishermen, and they are fighting for the protection of their environment.
주민의 권리, 실생한 땅을 뺏으려고 이거 서 있는 게 그렇게 자랑스러워? 어? 우리가 살아 지켜갈 곳 여기는 우리가 살아 농기를 수탈하고 강제숙련하고 표현할 수 있는 지식인의 한 사람으로서 저는 몸으로 실천하고 있습니다. 두 번째, 저는 문화인입니다. 영화평론가이고 대외는 없습니다. 이런 인간 친화적인 바위가 없어요. 인간 친화적인 바위를 해본 놈들이 국방의 한 이유말로 포크레인으로 바위를 깨고 있어요. 쿵쾅쿵쾅. 가슴이 아파요. 마음이 아파요. 이 바위가 상처를 입으면 내가 상처를 입는 거고, 이 바위가 깨지면 내가 깨지는 거고, 이 바위가 쓰러져 없으면 나도 죽어요. 너 안 돼. 파괴적이면 안 돼. 이 아름다운 환경 지켜야 돼. 나 몸을 던져서 막아내겠다. 이게 이제 10년이 그만했어요. 보고 외면할 수 없었죠. 이제 앞으로 30년은 고향을 위해서 그 현실과 싸워요. 앞으로 30년을 살려고 합니다. 저희 아름다운 제도의 파괴되는 모습들을 지켜만 보는 게 아니라 내 몸을 던져서 더 오랫동안 아름다움이 지켜지고 보존될 수 있도록 저 한 목숨 바쳐서
아 지금 일일구 불러드려
아저씨들 일어나세요.
일일구 불러드려
일어나세요.
사람 다쳤어요
The connection between the actions of the Korean constabulary, police, and the U.S. military in 1948 and the actions of the police in Gangjang Village today is inescapable, for they look down on the villages, distort the facts, and imprison those innocent and peaceful people who are fighting for survival. The April 3rd Peace Museum commemorates the Jeju massacre and honors the memory and the death of those innocent people. Mr. Gil-chun Ko, the creator of the main exhibit depicting the torturous deaths, said he had nightmares for months during and after his work on the exhibit. In a separate domed building, the names of the 30,000 known and identified dead are inscribed on black marble slabs 20 feet high. Outside on the grounds, thousands more headstones of those who had never been accounted for, and several sculptures are a somber reminder of the magnitude of this horrendous massacre. Exhibit is a Gilchun design sculpture of a woman and her baby who were shot to death as she crawled in the snow. In September of 1948, General William L. Roberts wrote to Prime Minister Lee Bum-suk,
As you know, operational control of the Korean constabulary still rests with the commanding general of the United States Army military government in Korea, and all orders pertaining to operational control must be cleared with the appropriate American advisor.
For over 60 years, the United States has exerted operational control over the Korean military. Since the Korean War, tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers have been stationed on bases all over South Korea in order to project power on the Korean peninsula. In 2011, President Obama indicated a pivot to Asia, committing 60% of America's naval might to East Asia in order to check China's expansion and to control the busiest sea shipping lanes in the world. In September 2012, the U.S. military gave the Korean military permission to extend the range of their ballistic missiles to reach all of North Korea and permission to use drones. Proof enough that America continues to dominate and occupy this sovereign nation and once again place it directly in the crosshairs of war between larger, more powerful empires.
For some years now, the Pentagon has been talking about whoever controls space will control the Earth below. And the idea then is to use space technology for what they call full spectrum dominance, controlling the Earth, controlling the sea, controlling the air above the Earth, and the sky itself, space.
Real-time battle management. That's what we're about, and that's what we are able to deliver through space, air, land, and sea, and the capability of all of those to come together. We started that in Desert Storm. We've done that in each conflict since, and we get better and better and better. We are so dominant in space that I pity a country that would come up against us. The synergy with air, land, and sea forces and our ability to control the battle space and seize the high ground is devastating.
Vision for 2020 is a Space Command planning document where they say that the U.S. will be the master of space. In fact, at the Air Force Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs, on their doorway, just above the door, they have that logo that reads Master of Space. And in fact, they even wear it as a patch on their uniform. So this planning document and this idea that the U.S. will control space, dominate space, and deny other countries access to space is really the strategic plan of the years ahead. And by the year 2020, they hope to have all of this in place. They really have come a long way in making it happen already.
In military strategy, it shows that if you want to control the battlefield, you need to be the first in seizing the high ground, the most advanced frontier. Whether it be land, sea, air, and now space, the person that controls that has the advantage. So making sure that nobody can deny our enemy's space is a huge advantage.
Obama has announced a pivot of the U.S. Navy into the Asia Pacific. He says that the U.S. will now redeploy 60% of our forces in
strategic military outpost as the U.S. tries to develop the ability to choke off China's importation of resources. As it turns out, China imports 80% of their oil on ships. So if the United States expands its naval presence in the region, it has the ability to choke off China's access to resources, giving the United States essentially the keys to China's economic engine. While we can't compete with China economically anymore, the Pentagon strategy is, well, if we hold a gun to their head and we control their access to resources, we'll control China. We'll manage China. This strategy has been underway for a very long time. But as you move 60% of your military, your Navy, into that region, you need more bases and more ports of call. And so, thus, we've gotten the South Korean government to build this base that is going to port U.S. aircraft carriers, U.S. nuclear submarine, and Navy Aegis destroyers outfitted with these so-called missile defense systems. So clearly, what's happening on Jeju Island is part of this larger U.S. military strategy to surround and control China.
How cool is it to be able to go home at night and tell your kids that you fly satellites at geosynchronous orbit? That is great stuff. How cool is it to know that you operate the most powerful radars on the planet and surveil the heavens, that you operate telescopes that are critical to national defense? How cool is it to tell people that you are responsible for maintaining nuclear missiles on alert for the defense of this country? This is a cool business that we are in.
Love will lead me over as I step across the line. Peace will be my cover as I step across the line.
The struggle to prevent the construction of this naval base on the island of world peace and one of the most beautiful and pristine islands in the world is an example in our time of how the United States has displaced indigenous people around the world. On March 6, 2012, the Korean Navy began dynamiting and smashing Gurumbi Rock in order to build a massive naval base to accommodate America's pivot to Asia. The beautiful shoreline and sacred places of Kangjang are being destroyed by the construction of this base and replaced with thousands of giant tetrapods, and the entire area that had been accessible to villages for over 400 years has been walled off with a barbed wire top wall 20 feet tall. Offshore, giant cranes can be seen dredging the ocean floor and polluting the crystal clear waters that are home to many endangered and protected species. Off in the distance, one can see the massive floating structure used to move the 10-story caissons that are intended to be the floating docks and artificial breakwaters for the base. Beneath the sea, Jeju's coral are unique, spectacular, and worthy of special protection. They form the largest and most spectacular temperate coral forests on Earth and were designated as Korean Natural Monument number 442 and a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And yet, the Korean government and Navy are completely ignoring the protection of this World Heritage Site as they forge ahead with their plans to accommodate America's attempt to check China's expansion. Also threatened are the rare and protected Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins, with only 114 remaining in Korean waters, as well as the native freshwater shrimp of Jeju. It is feared that the endangered and protected redfoot crab that has lived on and around Gurumbi for millennia, as well as the endangered and protected narrowmouth frog, will also be fatally threatened by the construction of this base. Kangjang Village is located between two rivers on Jeju Island, with water so pure one can drink it, and that are home to the largest freshwater fish habitat on the island. Kangjong's water provides 70 to 80% of the drinking water to the southern residents of Jeju Island. When completed, Kangjong Village will be replaced by the base that will accommodate housing for 8,000 Marines. Kangjong Village will become home to restaurants and shops, bars and brothels, catering to the needs and wants of soldiers and sailors, not to mention the contamination of the sea, the environment, and some of the world's purest water.
Several years ago, I became aware of and increasingly disturbed by what the late author Chalmers Johnson termed the garrisoning of the planet by the U.S. military. He was referring to a number of military bases that we have around the world. Quite amazingly, we have probably in the neighborhood of 1,100 military bases on foreign lands. This becomes all the more striking when we realize that the rest of the world's countries combined might have less than 200 total. We also have our military based in over 150 countries. There are three stories that caught my attention that are remarkably similar in nature. The first was that of Thule, Greenland, where I happened coincidentally to have been stationed as a young Air Force officer in 1964. 10 years prior to that, the indigenous people, the Inuits of Greenland, had been displaced to make way for Thule Air Base. The United States and Denmark, which at that time and still today had a governmental control over the continent or the island of Greenland, determined that these indigenous peoples would have to be removed to make way for the military base. And they were given 4 days to pack up all of their belongings and to move to a place 80 miles north where allegedly there would be homes waiting for them built by the United States military. Today, some 50 or 60 years later, those people are still trying to return to Thule, a place they call Umanok. And they are still seeking restitution for what had happened to them. Not many years after the displacement of the people of Thule, Greenland, in the mid-60s, the people of Diego Garcia, who called themselves the Chagos, or the Chagosian, were displaced to make way for another U.S. military base. Diego Garcia is in the middle of the Indian Ocean, about 1,200 miles from Mauritius, off the east coast of Africa, and southwest of India, another 1,200 miles to the northeast. There were some 2,000 people who lived on Diego Garcia, and they were told that they would have to leave their island, on which their people had lived for a couple of centuries. They too were packed up, placed on ships, and brought to Mauritius and the Seychelles Islands, where they were dumped off at a foreign place in a completely foreign culture. And they have since lived in abject poverty. This place that had been so idyllic for the Chagosians is used by the U.S. military to launch their aircraft to bomb Afghanistan and Iraq and who knows what other places in the Middle East. The people of the Marshall Islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean had also been subjected to this same sort of fate that had befallen the people of Greenland and the people of Diego Garcia. From 1946 to 1958, the United States determined that the Marshall Islands would be a good place to test our atomic bombs. And over the course of those 12 years, we detonated 67 atomic bombs over Bikini Atoll and some surrounding islands. And prior to that, the people who had lived on that island for generations, for thousands of years really, had been requested to move. So when I learned about Jeju Island, at that point in time, seeing and recognizing this all too common phenomenon associated with the United States military, I asked the rhetorical question, is there any place on earth so sacred, so remote, so beautiful as to be inviolable by the U.S. military? And when we think about what is happening to the people of Kangjong Village on Jeju Island, our answer is undeniably there is no place, there is no such place. What is happening on Jeju is seemingly, in my opinion, a sacrilege, an invasion of the highest order. We have not made these places or ourselves or the planet at large a safer place, but in fact we've done the opposite.
Despite the violations of law and human rights, the environmental protections, and the protests, construction continues at an ever-increasing pace, with as many as 80 cement trucks entering the base each day, 7 days a week. And for nearly 6 years, the villages and their supporters from Korea and around the world continue to protest, but are forcibly removed by hundreds of police from blocking the entrances to the base, sometimes as many as 10 times a day. And their supporters. These people are farmers and fishermen who are not able to put their livelihoods on hold to join the day-long protests at the gates. Depression has set in at the thought of losing this struggle, their village, their homes, and their livelihood.
And most of the villagers, they have to work in the field and in the city. They have no time. But from volunteers, it's carrying on still nowadays. And if they have a vacation, they come here and help.
And some give up jobs?
Some give up jobs too. Yeah.
Father Moon.
Yes.
Why do you do this? Protest every day.
Government declared that Gangjang villages agreed with the construction of the labor base, but it is a lie. The Gangjang villagers gathered together. They asked the will of the villagers. 96% of the population rejected that kind of construction. So the government, Korean government, cheated the villagers of Gangjang. Only USA face the world. Only country. Most of Americans should know the fact. U.S. government is not good. No more world police. So we are not happy with U.S. government. I have many good American friends. They are good. But American government is evil of this world. I think USA may be isolated by the people of this globe. So citizens, American citizens, should be aware of this fact. Otherwise you will be in danger. you will lose all the friends in this world. So I'd like to ask American people to be aware of what U.S. government are doing in this world.
The day begins at sunrise with 100 bows and the morning prayer on the bridge beside the main gate.
서로 의지하고 도우며 사는 진리의 길은 이웃 가족의 개성과 가치의 존귀함을 존중하고 감사하며 62번째 절을 올립니다.
And every day at this time, workers pass on their way into the base and another day of work. I imagine they feel just like the Aegis shipbuilders at Bab Iron Works and the millions of military-industrial complex workers around the world. Without this work, they wouldn't have jobs. As soon as the morning prayers are finished, activists take up their positions blocking the gate where they will stay until late afternoon, and lately all night as construction rushes ahead at a frantic pace. Among the protesters are priests, nuns, ministers, and Buddhist monks, but most are elderly villagers and young peace activists from Korea and other countries.
Is the reason I've made that reason mine, and love is all around me as I step across the line, as I step across the line. They are all our children, no matter near or far. I take this step for them, no matter who they are. Love will lead me over as I step across the line. Peace will be my cover as I step across the line, as I step across the line. Justice is the reason I've made that reason mine.
Catholic Mass is celebrated every day at 11 a.m. on the roadside opposite a second gate. Priests, nuns, and Catholics from Jeju and the mainland arrive in buses to pray and support the villagers in their struggle.
My name is Sister Stella So, belong to Missionary Philippine Sisters of Tuching. And I'm living in Seoul. Whenever I have time and money, I come here. Because, anyway, first, I'm shame on me and our government. And my hope is the peace and unification of our nation. But here, there are our government and construction company. Behind them, there is American government and weapon company. You know that. They construct the naval base. It will become the base of the war. Korea will become the slave of America. So, I don't want war. I don't want to be a slave. You know that? I understand that America is imperialistic. Under the mask of imperialism, they dominate our country. We live in the world where the stronger prey upon the weaker. We are weaker. I'm here because of reading the Bible and because of the will of God. And I understand that the kingdom of God is a peace and justice. So I'm really worried about it and angry about it, angry by myself and our government and American government. So I came here. Do you understand?
And after Mass, they pray the Rosary. Father Moon is the iconic 74-year-old priest who has been beaten, hospitalized, and imprisoned for trying to stop construction of the base. On one occasion, Father Moon was celebrating Mass in front of one of the gates when suddenly, without waiting for the Mass to be completed, the police moved in, knocking the makeshift altar and the consecrated host to the ground and stepping on it. For Catholics, desecrating the host, which they believe is the body of Christ, is the greatest of sacrileges. And then, announcing the arrival of more cement trucks, hundreds of police march across the bridge to remove the peaceful protesters. Jane, a 27-year-old school teacher from Seoul, left her job to come to Gangjeong to fight against the construction of the naval base.
저는 올해 3월에 왔고요. 3월에 저 펜스 안에 있는 브럼비 바위를 발파한다고 해서 그걸 막고 싶어서 왔습니다. 그리고 저는 그때부터 지금까지 강정 마을에 계신 주민들의 바람처럼 이 강정 마을을 지키는 일을 쭉 하고 싶습니다. 그리고 저도 그건 역시 저 자신을 지키는 일이기도 합니다. 여느 때처럼 레미콘이 몰렸을 때 경찰이 와서 우리를 포착하는데 그 과정에서 신발이 벗겨진 채로 들려갔고 그 안에서 경찰이 발을 밟고 있었어요. 네, 그래서 들고 갔는데? 들고 가고 놓고서 밟고 있었고 그 다음에 집에 가서 좀 아프고 발이 붓길래 병원에 갔더니 금이 갔다고. 네.
Over 128,000 police have been rotated through Gangjeong village. They have arrested almost 600 activists, charged and put on trial more than 500 of them. And 22 activists and villagers have served time in prison, some for as long as 9 months. Professor Yang Young-mo, a well-known Korean film critic for 30 years and a native of Jeju Island, began serving an 18-month prison sentence in January 2013, his fourth imprisonment. During the fourth prison term, Professor Yang began his fourth hunger strike lasting 50 days. On most evenings, a candlelight vigil is held either in the Peace Center or at the gates. Young activists and village elders come together to decompress, reflect on the events of the day, and to support one another. The sense of community is overwhelming and can be felt everywhere throughout the day. And then everyone, young and old alike, participates in the joyful singing and dancing that stands in stark contrast to the physically and emotionally draining activity that took place all day long at the gates of the base. It seems to serve the twofold purposes of relieving stress and ending the day with a profound sense of joy and happiness. Day after day, the protests and police action takes place with clock-like regularity as tons more cement rolls through the gates and the destruction of their beloved village continues. While activists are nonviolent, they do resist. What you don't see is the pinching and punching inflicted by the police. Many of the activists are covered with bruises and suffer broken ribs, fingers, and toes. After every police action, I could not help looking at the faces of the young men and women who are sent to put down the protest. Many were characteristically expressionless, some looked perplexed, and always a few looked back on the activists they had just removed. I wondered what goes through their minds as they perform this duty day after day. Behind the scenes, the International Peace Team meets regularly to organize and coordinate activities, maintain social media, and produce a monthly English language newsletter which goes out to thousands of people worldwide. Sung-hee Choi, the coordinator of the team, works long hours organizing and providing daily updates to supporters in Korea and around the world.
I want to emphasize that this struggle against the Jeju Naval Base project is not regional local struggle, but rather international struggle, because the United States government has emphasized that the Asia Pacific will be their next front. Please, people in the United States, please concern with our struggle, support our struggle with whatever you can. Spiritually, financially, whatever. Please.
On April 3rd, 2013, the anniversary of the massacre on Jeju, with thousands gathered to commemorate the event, Sung-hee courageously raised a No Naval Base banner in front of a jumbotron. She was quickly surrounded by Korean security guards and dozens of plain-clothed and uniformed police and hustled out of sight. That didn't stop her from dressing down the police.
여기 가만히 있을 테니까 놔줘요. 이걸 유엔에서도 모르는데 의사들이
아저씨를 지는 거잖아. 아저씨들이 방해하고 있잖아 지금 행사를.
오히려 불법이에요.
아저씨들이 방해.
유엔의 보장된 인권표현을.
왜 잡아? 내도.
근데 나도 지금 아무것도 없습니다. 여기 도민 여러분들, 여기 제주 경찰 중에는 도민 여러분들도 있습니다. 우리는 모두 제주를 사랑하고요.
Others film and photograph just about everything, from protests and peace marches to concerts and special ceremonies and holidays. conditions vary. Some, like Paco, an American, and his Korean wife, Silver, are fortunate to live in a house someone made available. They cook, clean, work, and do laundry. Other activists who come to Kangjang for various durations have it pretty good, living in dorms in the village center. Others live in metal containers and sleep on floors. There is electricity, but no running water or bathroom facilities. And there are those who work long hours preparing food for everyone. 3 meals each day, and no one ever goes away hungry. The food is healthy, plentiful, and delicious, and is made possible by financial contributions from churches and organizations in Korea and around the world. Because the activists never leave their posts during the day, lunch is delivered right to the gates in the back of a Korean-style pickup. Here again, the sense of community and joy is obvious, with everyone contributing in his or her own way. Served in a large tent-like dining hall for activists, villagers, and the many visitors who stand in solidarity with the people of Kangjang in their struggle. During my stay, there were members of Veterans for Peace from the U.S. and Korea, delegations from Hawaii, Okinawa, and Japan, and peace workers from several countries. Hawaii, Okinawa, and Japan came in solidarity with the people of Jeju because they are protesting the very same activity of the United States military in their territories. And always, the energetic and ever-present Mayor Khan spends time with them all. After losing numerous appeals to the government in countless court battles, the villagers had hoped that the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, holding their World Conservation Congress on Jeju in September 2012, would listen to their pleas and support the protest. Ron Engel, an American from the Center for Humans and Nature, made the case in favor of the resolution.
You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Ron Engel, a member of the Center for Humans and Nature and the Ethics Specialist Group of the Commission on Environmental Law. I would like to have a step back and think very briefly, but as clearly as we can, what the genesis of this motion was. For those of us who became aware of this issue in February of this year, we did not ask for this issue to be put before us. Gangjiang Village is everything that IUCN says it believes in. It is an indigenous community that has lived sustainably with a rare and fragile ecological community for hundreds of years. It is everything that the World Charter for Nature and the Earth Charter aspires for us to follow. It only wants to live as it has lived, and to pass on its legacy to the future. In 2003, the government of Korea apologized for the history of Jeju Island and declared this island an island of peace. The people of Jeju and Gangjiang deserve to have their island remain an island of peace and ecological integrity and beauty and sustainable living, and not become a base for military defense or the target of military actions by others. Mr. Chairman, the people of the world need Jeju to remain an island of peace as a beacon of hope for all of us.
In a contentious debate and vote, a resolution opposing the construction of the base was defeated. Most of the nations represented either voted against or abstained in deference to the sovereignty of the Korean government. However, the resolution won the support of 269 non-governmental organizations and hundreds of Congress participants.
The motion was not adopted. The battle does not end here. There are some groups who are willing to take this up in the United Nations. So this is grounds for the people of Gwangju and Jeju not to give up hope. There is hope, and we will continue the fight.
In the end, the organizers of the conference cowered to the Korean government and Samsung, a major supporter of the IUCN. Not only have national security interests blinded the Korean government and judicial system, they have silenced the world's largest and oldest conservation organization from taking a more principled stand to protect nature and to stand up for human rights. Just moments after the disappointing announcement came to the villagers gathered outside the convention site, they immediately showed their resilience and perseverance by engaging in song and dance for over an hour with many of the Congress participants.
Touched a place in my heart because South Korea, I'm married, I don't know if you know this, I'm married to a South Korean woman as my third wife, and she's been a wonderful lady. It's almost 17 years of marriage. We have a daughter who's half Korean, so I've always had a place in my heart for Korea. But people have pointed to the massacres in the South, aided and abetted and sometimes commanded by the U.S. military because of the fear of communism, the fear that these civilian populations would go communist. Same kind of thing happened in Vietnam, where the South Vietnamese peasantry was suspected of being communist, and many of them were killed.
I've been to Kangjong village 3 times, and every time I go there, I am deeply, deeply affected by the incredible spirit of the people, their connection to nature, their understanding about our relationship to nature, that we humans are part of nature, and that as we destroy nature, we literally destroy ourselves. But my last time I went there, the fence was being built around the area. The barbed wire was at that time placed along the rocks of Gurumbi. We went out on kayaks to try to get onto the rocks. We crawled under the razor wire and were arrested and taken to jail. For me, Jeju Island is, and particularly Gangjong Village, this 500-year-old fishing and farming community, is an important symbol for the peace movement all over the world. The reason is because everything comes together here. This new growing conflict between the United States and China, and in fact Russia too, because Russia borders North Korea. It's part of that whole region as well. The environmental degradation that's going to come from this Navy base on Jeju, and the whole human rights issue as the people's movement there is suppressed, as the military boot comes down on their neck to try to stop their efforts to resist and defend their way of life. So for the peace movement all over the world, I think this fight on Jeju Island is fundamental.
In the face of what seems to be inevitable defeat, many are protesting with their bodies and hearts and all of their energies. Their spirit and determination are infectious, each individual contributing to a formidable mass that we would all like to believe is indomitable. There are many in this struggle, each assuming different roles. They find strength in each other, their community, and their past. More and more people around the world are noticing. There are more who understand the long-range folly of the dark forces that would destroy our planet. Kangjong may be lost, maybe not, but through the struggle, the voices of Jeju and Gangjeong are reaching the four corners of the earth and making incremental gains. By visiting Gangjeong, I learned we each have a voice. As we become more knowing, the voice gains amplitude, authenticity, and responsibility. The Sunghis, the Mayor Kongs, the Gilchans, the Reginas and the Kristens, the Father Kims, the Father Patricks, the Jesuits, the Professor Yangs are all on the front lines of this global struggle. With citizenship in this country comes a responsibility for its deeds. There is hope only in the belief that committed people can bring peace to the world. And that is the message of Jeju. The least we can do is amplify their voices. At stake in our time is not who is stronger or which system is better, but the survival of us as one species in harmony with the only home we have. What is at stake, if we are to survive, is a common understanding by all who people the earth about who we are and how we are connected to each other, to the earth and the entire universe. That is our hope and the prayer we lift to the heavens today.
government and ultra-right wingers don't want the historical atrocity revealed and disseminated widely throughout the world. Have you ever been harassed, stalked, and threatened by them because of the movie, The Ghosts of Jeju?
Do you think I should be?
No, not.
No, I have not been harassed at all. People, I'm very small time, independent filmmaker, and the film's not shown in movie theaters, so I'm sure whoever would want to harass me are not concerned about me.
자, 질문이 뭐였냐면요. 한국 정부와 미국 정부 구구주의자들이 그들의 역사적인 가오가
I can't hear you.
I'm translating. Just please wait a second. I'm translating for them. 그러니까 뭐지?
You're breaking up.
A few minutes, yes.
Please wait for a second. 자, 그러니까 그들의 역사적인 과오가 드러나거나 알려지는 걸 원치 않는다고 믿고 이 무비를 만든 감독을 못 살게 굴 적이 있냐 그런 걸 질문했더니 절대 그런 적이 없다고. 미국에서는 자기가 아무런 문제도 생기지 않았다, 협박도 받지 않았고 그랬다는 얘기예요.
그러니까 그 무비가 일반 극장에서 보여지지 않고 자유기고자들의 개인적으로 만든 영화이기 때문에 아마 그랬을 거라는 것이 저 사람이.
아니요, 세컨 퀘스천에서 그 문제가 나와요. 물어볼게요. The second question: Did you submit this movie to the Chicago Peace Honors Film Festival, or did they reach out to you first? Was it screened?
You're breaking up. I don't hear you now.
The second question is that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Yeah, okay. Was it screened at any other Korean or American movie festivals? Did you submit this movie to the Chicago Peace Earth Film Festival?
Yes, I submitted it to the Chicago Peace on Earth Festival, and there it won the Best Expose Award. It was very well received. We got more attention than anybody else screening films there. It was very exciting. And it was also screened at the Berkeley, California Film Festival, and I did not submit to them. They heard about it and asked to screen it. And in Korea, the film has now been translated into Korean with Korean subtitles, and Joyak Gol, an activist at Kangjang, traveled with me from the Chicago Peace on Earth Film Festival to California. 13 cities we screened the film, and he finished the translation into Korean and put subtitles on the film, and he has been screening it around Jeju and South Korea. Just this month, it has been screened at the Jeju Fringe Festival in Jeju City, Incheon Film Festival, Seoul National University, Cheongju, and on October 31st at the Catholic Film Festival in Seoul, which is sponsored by the Jesuit Fathers. So it is beginning to go all around Korea, and it is being very, very well received. People thank me for making the film, and thank Joyak Gol for spreading it around Korea. And he will continue to do that as long as anybody wants to see it.
그러니까 제가 질문을 뭐를 드렸냐면요. 이 영화를 시카고 세계 영화제에 직접 출품했나 아니면 그들이 당신을 찾아왔냐 그거랑 한국이나 미국의 다른 영화제에서도 상영이 된 적 있냐 이걸 물어봤어요. 그랬더니 자기가 시카고 영화제에 출품을 했고 버클리 영화제에도 출품을 했고 시카고 영화제에서 그 최고 그 필름 발굴 특별상을 받았대요. 그리고 그 시카고 영화제로 그 조약골이라는 사람하고 같이 여행을 했는데 그 이후에 이 조약골 씨가 한국어판을 제작을 해가지고 그 이번 달에만 5군데에서 상영회를 가졌대요. 한국에서 그 제주 프린지 필름 영화제, 그러니까 인천 영화제, 서울대 영화제. I'm translating for people 해석해 드릴게요. The third question. Many people began having pessimistic views and giving up on their struggles. Do you have anything to say to those becoming hopeless?
Oh, yes, I do. As you probably, well, first of all, are most of the people there Korean language speakers?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm
and
translating.
이따 해요. 다 끝나고. 예, 뭐.
Yeah, you can tell right now. I can translate later.
Okay. Did you show the film with Korean subtitles, or is it the English version?
Korean subtitle.
Oh, good. Okay. I think people all over South Korea are sometimes pessimistic and depressed because the government has been putting down the protests. And there are many, many in South Korea. The labor unions and the Catholic priests have been calling for the resignation of President Park. They demonstrate constantly. The people, the survivors, the parents of the seawall disaster, same thing, protesting every day, and the government pays no attention and is now making arrests. In Gangjang village, the people there have been protesting for 8 years. And I saw some photographs from Gangjang where inside the gates, behind the 20-foot walls, there are buildings that are 4 stories high. And just this week, the government and the Navy started building housing for 8,000 Marines. Immediately adjacent to the elementary school in downtown, right in this little village, and they're going to be taking over a lot of land, several acres of land to build housing for 8,000 Marines. And so the people, after 8 years, sometimes get depressed because it looks like they're not going to stop it. But this is what I say to them, and I say to people all over the world. The people in Gangjang are an example and a model of nonviolent, peaceful protests. They're an example for people everywhere, and here in America, who are fighting against governments who do not represent the people. They are fighting, people everywhere are fighting against American militarism and the expansion of military bases. And I keep telling them that they are an inspiration to all of us. And they are challenging us to not just sit back and do nothing, but somehow to become involved.
뭐라 그러냐면
나중에 얘기하고 그거는
그러면 질문 이제 질문 3개는 이미 드렸거든요. 하시고 싶은 질문 있으시면 하세요. 선생님 뭐 질문 있으세요?
그 오바마 정권이
네.
왜 그렇게 패권주의로
네.
중국하고 대결, 그러니까 세계적인 공생의 파트너로 함께 가지 않고 그렇게 대결 구도로 그렇게 외워싸려고 하는 것이 미국의 어떤 그 열정감 아니면 어떤 그 미국의 숨겨진 컴플렉스 아니면 미국 제국주의 안에 악령이 그렇게 기승을 계속 부리는지, 또 한국은 중립국가가 될 수 없는지는 그게 중요합니다.
그 영어로 직접 하세요.
그냥 하세요.
Why Obama government set the pivot to Asia policy? Why Obama wants to control Asia, China? What do you think?
Was that man's question?
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think it's pretty obvious that the United States is projecting power and using violence all over the world. Everybody is aware of Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and People are aware of the Ukraine and the role that the United States is playing in the Ukraine, and they are projecting power against Russia and China. And I believe that President Obama is not in charge, and the United States Congress is not in charge. The ones who are making policy are the big banks, the multinational corporations, the very rich and wealthy people, and the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex are all of those large companies who make planes, warships, missiles, satellites, guns, bullets, everything that's used for war. And these people are the ones who are controlling the United States Congress and President Obama. And their intention, their purpose is to dominate the entire world by force so that they can continue the American capitalist system in the entire world. That's very controversial, I know, but that is what's happening. And the pivot to Asia is to project power against China and to control the busiest sea shipping lanes in the world. And so the United States is doing that on all the oceans and all the continents to dominate.
Thank you. Next question 있어요?
저기 미국이 이렇게 한국의 대통령을 뽑는데 약간의 그 개입이 전혀 없지는 않았었던 걸로 알고 있는데 이번에 박근혜 정부에 대해서 박근혜가 지금 정치를 하고 있는 거에 대해서 지금 감독님이 보시는 입장에서 어떻게 생각하시는지 궁금합니다.
So we believe that the U.S. intervened the presidential election of 2012. What do you think of President Park's policy or politics?
Yeah, I think, and I base this on what I hear from my Korean friends who are there in South Korea now, from what I read in the papers, English-speaking Korean newspapers. It seems that President Park is resorting to the kind of governing of her father, the last dictator in South Korea. All of the repressive policies, she's attacking the unions, she wants to privatize the railroads and the power companies, and she's using the police and the military to put down any and all protests against what she's doing. So I see the same kind of thing happening in South Korea that's happening in the United States today, whereas the government is not representing the people but oppressing them.
정부가 억압할 뿐이고 저기 뭐야. 그다음 next question 있어요?
2012년에
예.
그 이제 강정에 이제 가서 방문을 했었다 그랬잖아요.
예.
근데 이제 그 이전에 한국에 대해서 혹시 알고 있었는지, 그러니까 관심이 있었는지.
So one more question.
Yeah. Okay.
You visited Gangjeong in 2012. Before that year, were you interested in Gangjeong?
아니 그냥 한국에서.
Did you visit Gangjeong before? Did you visit Korea?
No.
Oh.
No, that was
first time.
my first trip there.
그 전에 한국에 대해서.
as I said in the film, I thought I was going to make a short film about the protest against the United States military. And what I learned ended up becoming the film.
But
So,
did you know about Korean history before?
No. Nobody in America knows much about Korean history. Either the war, the April 3rd incident, the people don't know about that. I didn't know about that. But when I went there, I learned what happened, and I saw what the American military presence has been for almost 70 years now. And that made me very angry, very ashamed, and motivated me to make this film and to spend all of my time now spreading this story to the entire world. And can people understand my English?
Yes, understand.
Okay, good. Right now, there are thousands and thousands of people in the United States who have seen the film. There are people in 17 different countries around the world that have seen the film. It has been translated into Korean. The Japanese translation is almost finished, and they will begin screening it throughout Japan and Okinawa. It's just been translated into French, and I am putting subtitles on the film here, and it will be translated into Spanish by Christmas. So it's really amazing how the story has gone around the world because of people like you who've seen it and believe that it needs to be shown to as many people as possible. And people always ask me, after they see the film, what can we do? And I tell them, the most effective thing they can do is to share this film with other people. They can get a copy from the website for only $20, and that helps me travel. I don't make any money on any of this. But when people like yourself have shown it to their friends, the library, their faith groups, everybody wants to tell that story again and share it with others. And that's how it has gone around the world without any major distributor, without any money. It's just through people like yourselves that have spread the word. And I think that is a testimony to the people of Kangjang who inspire everybody who sees it in spite of the overwhelming odds that they face. And I will tell you one more thing. Do you all remember seeing Sister Stella Soul?
Yes.
Sister Stella Soul has been arrested and convicted of the crime of obstructing construction. She is appealing, but she will probably go to jail. And she is the first Korean nun to have been convicted of a crime in Korea in 200 years. And everybody who sees Sister Stella love her. They're inspired by her because her witness is so powerful.
수녀님 소수님 아까 그 영화 속에서도 나왔잖아요. 그분이 예, 잡혀서 이제 제일에 들어갔대요.
근데 이분이요, 저희 한국에 대해서 좀 별로 이렇게
몰랐어요.
모르다가 이제 이번에
2012년 가셔서 알게
됐잖아요. 근데 이분이 좀 자연주의자이신가요? 아니면 뭐 정치성이 좀 있으신 분인가? 그것이 좀 궁금하고, 또 지금 우리가 그 강정 마을이 이렇게 지금 자연이 파괴되는 그런 거를 이제 주민들이 이제 반대하는 거잖아요. 근데 그 주민들 자체는 뭐 정치적인 거는 없이 그냥 내가 내 살던 곳을 내가 살리기 위해서 투쟁하는 거잖아요, 지금. 근데 이분이 감독 이분도 그런 의도에서 지금 이거 이 필름을 찍고 이렇게 하시는 건가? 아니면은 그 미국이 한국에 대해서 옛날서부터 그 제주 그 학살하고 뭐 이런 여러 가지 이런 일들에 좀 정치적인 거를 미국은 좀 반성해라 뭐 이런 뜻에서 하는 건지, 그것이 조금 제가
Okay.
알고 싶어요.
Okay.
Together.
So, one question: Are you an environmentalist, or are you interested in politics a lot? Are you prone to activism?
Oh yes, I am an activist. And my only two concerns now are the United States militarism around the world. I do everything I can to expose that and to work for peace and protection of the environment. Because of climate change, we are all in great danger if we cannot stop very quickly the effects, disastrous effects that will happen because the world will get too warm and the seas will rise too high, and everybody on the islands in the Pacific, in South Pacific, are tremendously threatened, as you all know, with the typhoons that have gone through Philippines, Japan, and even Jeju. So those are my only concerns. And going to Jeju and making this film changed my life. My purpose now is to spread this story wherever I can.
영화를 만들기 전에는 아니었는데 그거 강정을 하고 나서부터 이제 액티비스트가 된 거예요. So before you making this film, you were not activist. Just after you making this film, you became activist, right?
No, I became an activist before I made this film.
Okay.
And I was part of the Occupy movement here in the States.
Okay.
And I created a television show in Maine about the Occupy movement here. And I also have been very involved and still am with many environmental issues here in Maine and around the world. The environment, I've been an activist.
So how was the New York, New Jersey event today?
I can't hear you.
Previous this event, there was a New York event. How was the New York event going?
You mean the climate march?
No, the screening by able Japanese people.
Oh, yeah, I just finished the Skype session with them 1 hour ago. It was very good. Quite a lot of people, mostly Korean American people, and there were some Americans there too. But they had a very successful screening there as well. And isn't it wonderful we can Skype so I can be there with you?
Right. How many difficult questions did you get from that event? Any difficult questions from them?
No, same kind of questions that you asked. Yeah, same kind of questions. It's always...
How many people were there?
I couldn't tell. I can't tell how many are there now because I can only see 4 or 5 people in you, so I don't know. How many people are there?
몇이야? 둘, 넷, 여섯,
말하고 저기 좀
10 people, 10.
10 people.
Yes.
And everybody there has to get a copy of the film to share it with 10 more people.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the most effective thing anybody can do, is to share that film with other people.
이 영화를 다른 사람들과 나누래요. 많이 같이 보고 얘기 나누고. Any question? 없어요? 네, 뭐.
일단은 먼저 이제 미국 사람이 우리 한국의 그런 이슈에 대해서 관심 가지고 영화를 만드는 거에 대해서 감사하고 그리고 우리가 이제 이 사실을 알았다는 게 너무 창피하고 전에는 한국에 대해서 아무것도 모르시던 분이 어떻게 이런 조그만 나라에 조그만 섬에서 일어난 일을 찾아서 영화로까지 만드셨는지
people here, they are thanking you for making this film. How can you make as an American citizen?
I didn't hear the last thing you said.
We felt shame on ourselves. We should make this film ourselves. But you, as an American, you made this film. Thank you. And what made you make this film?
Well, thank you very much for watching the film. And I'm making another film now that will begin in Hawaii and go to Japan and Okinawa and Jeju again, the Philippines, and hopefully Guam next summer. And it will show the effects of American militarism on the people, the culture, and the environment, and will show the massive nonviolent protests that are now occurring all over against this American militarism. So I've already started to make that film.